Grab your blanket and your hot drink of choice as we settle down to wander for an entire year in the garden path. Hello, Cozy Gamers, and welcome back to the Cozy Gaming Club, where we talk about all the latest and greatest cozy games. I'm Ellie, and today I'll be showing you my first year in Cozy Slice of Life game, The Garden Path, which launches today on PC and Switch. This video is kindly sponsored by the publishers Mooncat Games, who wanted me to show you what you can expect from the full game. As someone who backed the Kickstarter though, I was very excited for this relaxing gardening game and eager to jump straight in and start a new adventure. Which brings us to the character design screen. I have never seen a character screen like this before, where you essentially change your skin tone and hair colour by dragging the dial to a different spot on the axes. There was a wide range of colours to pick from, although I was a little sad I couldn't go for a bright hair colour like I usually do. Then it was straight into the tutorial with a strange ripped note that told me to follow the path southward. The sound of beautiful bird song starts up as soon as I enter the game, as well as a mysterious voice that complains it's a little dark. It teaches me how to light my lantern, which you may notice uses the left stick button as this game is recommended to be played on a controller. But then I get my first look at the garden. I'm surrounded by trees and waterways and stone lanterns as I run down the path to find the mysterious voice, which turns out to be a stone shrine. I learned how to open my bag, which is surprisingly full, with a hatchet, a thermos, a tent, a lamp, and some money, as well as the mysterious note I found earlier. When I try to speak to the shrine for a second time, it just repeats the same thing again and again, and for a moment I am confused, until a little glimmer of butterflies leads me further down the path. So off I went through a rundown wall and a fence where I met another shrine. This one warned me that plants can be dangerous, and taught me how to investigate the flora around me. While I couldn't harvest anything yet, I diligently recorded each plant before continuing along the path and across the bridge. Further down, there was yet another shrine that suggested I try out my hatchet on a nearby birch tree. It took me a couple of attempts to work out how to do that, but before long I was hacking away at the tree and received my first tone. Tones are a sort of currency that you collect throughout the game, and while they can't be spent on trading, they do increase the possibility of gathering a rarer item from your garden. Each tone is represented by one of the 4 seasons, and carrying out actions in a season will help you collect more of that type. As I continued down the path, I hit a loading screen, and then entered my garden. Every garden in this game is randomly generated, so your garden may look different to mine, but the map makes it very easy to navigate. A moment later, I found a half of secateurs laid on the ground. They're not very useful in a half rather than a pair, which is likely why they were abandoned. But I decided to collect them and take them with me anyway, just in case. I then stumbled across the community centre. The pigeonhole showed a number of the residents I would meet throughout this playthrough, and there was also the community board and a compost bin as well. Now that I didn't have the path to follow, I was free to explore the entirety of my garden, and I had no idea where to start. But as I ran through the trees and along the cliff edges, I spotted a little question mark on the bottom of my screen telling me where to go. I quickly sped through the garden, following the question mark, which is when I came across Augustus, who was also wandering. He asked me if I was a ranger like him, charged with keeping peace in the natural world, and offered me his guidebook to learn more. One of the rules of the Park Scout Rangers is that cubs should always be equipped with a pocket knife. Sadly, I didn't have one though, so Augustus gifted me another half of secateurs and explained that he'd lost the first half somewhere in the garden. Well, the good news for Augustus is that we'd already found them. I received a question from him to help find the other half of the cutters, but I wasn't able to complete it yet. So I continued through the garden towards the next question mark. This turned out to be another visitor called Lato who loved fishing. He told me all about songfish in the waters and gave me a fishing rod so I could try fishing myself. If you've spent any time on my channel before, you know how much I love fishing and cozy games, and I was intrigued to see how the fishing worked in the garden path. By moving your left stick around, you whistle for a fish and attract them to the surface. Then it was a simple case of positioning my bobber in the center of the target to catch them. I was intrigued to see that each fish had special abilities which you can see popping up on the side here, like the aroma fish that brings herbs to full health. It's a very cool feature that I probably didn't use enough in my own playthrough. With my fishing task completed, I made my way back to Augustus to see if I could return his secateurs, and I could. He was so grateful and confessed that he was trying to receive his gardening badge, even though he wasn't much of a gardener. You and me both, buddy. Instead, he decided to tie the secateurs back together and give them to me as a gift. Now I'd be able to cut bushes and plants to collect resources from the natural world. In fact, Augustus would like me to collect him some bracken sprigs as a favour, and in return he'd trade me even more tools. I set to work investigating and recording the flora around me while I searched for the bracken. I was also collecting these strange guide stones which are still sitting in my inventory at the end of my 30 days, as I'm not really sure what to do with them. While searching for bracken, I bumped into Lato again and was able to complete the fishing quest I'd started earlier, which unlocked Lato's store where he traded fish of every type. I also asked him who wrote the mysterious note that I'd come across, and he told me about an old man who wanders a garden, but he couldn't tell me any more than that. Fortunately, I didn't need any more info than that because as I continued my search for bracken, I accidentally stumbled across the old man. His name is Thom. He cultivates a garden over yonder and occasionally explores this garden as well. I tell him that I'm planning to start my own garden here, and he gives me a trowel to get started with. He also lets me know that he runs a seed store, and in fact, he thinks we should have a trade. But before that, I asked him about the mysterious note. He thinks that he knows who wrote it and suggested that I look for an old stone statue where I may find a clue to the author's identity. Then I came across a patch of bracken and got to work harvesting all of the sprigs I needed for Augustus. In no time at all, I was handing them over to my bear friend, which unlocked his store of tools that he apparently finds lying around in the gardens. Sounds a bit sus to me, but I'm a gardener in need of tools and can't be too picky. I then accidentally discovered the constellations, which are kind of like the achievements for this game. Each one has its own name, and there are so many to unlock in total for doing different things in your garden. After brewing a pot of chamomile tea, I decided it was time to search for the mysterious stone statue that Thom had told me about. There wasn't any direction for this, so I spent a while just wandering around my garden, listening to the birdsong, and recording the wide variety of plants I found there. You'll notice that the time of day changes in a moment. That's because I took a little break from the game before coming back to continue later, and the garden path is very similar to games like Cozy Grove and Animal Crossing, where each day exists in real time. Life in your garden continues even when you're not there, and each visit will change depending on the time of day. Eventually, I stumbled across the statue of the old gardener and a pile of stones beside them. Interacting with the statue revealed a small scrap of paper hidden in its side, which combined with my mysterious note to make a journal page. Page 86 to be exact. Of course, I read it immediately, and while it wasn't that different from the original read, when I returned to Thom, he told me more about the letter. He suspected that perhaps it had been left for a different purpose, and told me that the gardens were full of secrets to discover, and that if I find any, I should give them to him. As I'm already speaking to him, I decided to also trade with him for some seeds to complete the quest. I accidentally discovered here that I can press left and right to increase or decrease the quantity I'm buying, which also changes the items you're trading for them. While I didn't know at this point what the different symbols meant, when I clicked through to my inventory, I could trade one of my twigs and weeds and one of my shillings for the daffodil bulbs. But I still needed one more nature item, so I went quickly to get some cuttings. Before long, I had my daffodil bulbs in hand and it was time to plant them, but I decided to call it a day here as I'd already been playing for nearly an hour. The first thing I did on day 2 was placing some of the furniture I had in my inventory, like my tent, lantern, and a wooden planter. Then I made my way all the way across my garden, documenting and cutting plants along the way to meet with a new villager. Their name was Worm, and they'd come by because I dropped some items in a composter at the end of day 1. I'd been very curious about what I'd get in return, as there doesn't really seem to be any currency in this game, and it turns out to be pop sticks, which can be used to decorate your garden by planning where things should go. With my new villager met, it was time to continue with my quests, which meant planting things. As well as my daffodil bulbs, I also planted a gorse seedling and some bluebell bulbs that I'd collected from the plants. Which is when I discovered that you can listen to seedlings to hear what items they want. Sadly, I didn't have any of them though. My quest was completed though, so I returned to Thom, who was delighted and said I could officially call myself a gardener. He explained if I continued to grow plants and decorate my garden, I'd be able to convince other wanderers to move in. This also triggered 3 new quests to be added to my task list, alongside Thom's original quest from the day before to find more journal entries. I needed to find the encyclopedia, obtain a shovel, and run an errand for a villager. I wasn't really sure where to get started with most of these, but the little butterflies told me to go north, so north I went. The one clue I did have was the shovel quest, as I knew that my friend Augustus carried tools in his store, so that was my first stop. Unfortunately, I couldn't buy any of them. 3 of them had this strange candle-like symbol that I'd never seen before and didn't match up with any of my items, while the 4th one had a bug which I had no way of catching yet. Sadly, that meant I would not be acquiring a shovel on day 2, but there was still lots to do. I continued to explore and document everything that I discovered, which included a funny mole burrow that transported me across the entire map. Sadly, it wouldn't let me go back the way I came though, so I decided to do some fishing before running all the way back. The first fish I caught was a pine fish, which is when I remembered that fish had special abilities. This one would create pine seedlings around me when released, which is what I did. Hopefully they'll grow into pine trees in the future. I was also quickly realizing that I couldn't run wherever I wanted in the gardens, as some of the plants were deadly, which the shrine had tried to warn me about on the first day. I now had 5 injuries, although they thankfully didn't seem to affect me too much. Eventually, I made it back to the top of the garden where I met my new visitor, Olga. She had stumbled across my garden and wanted to stay here permanently. Of course, I said yes and let her join the garden, which is when she told me she thought she'd make a pretty good egg. I suppose she is kind of egg-shaped. While chatting to Thom, I discovered that he had some squeaky secateurs in his shop, and the cool thing about this is that they have a special effect. So some items in the game can help you to collect more tones for the current season, as long as you carry out the tasks listed on them, in this case being spoken to by a visitor. There is a slight cooldown on these tasks, but you can essentially get one for every one of your tools and clothing items, and they range from tasks as simple as walking around to planting seeds or completing errands. I definitely recommend getting some of these as they really speed up tone collection, and I grabbed my first pair right now. Then I also bought a pair of green Wellington boots that gives me a tone for recording plants. Trading in this game is different from others as you're essentially using the resources you collect from around the garden in lieu of money. It's also worth noting, and I didn't notice this until probably after day 15, but each resource has a rating from F to S tier, and traders will ask for a specific tier of resource as well as a type. Anyway, with my new wellies and secateurs equipped, it was time to explore more of the garden. I started by trying out the project menu, which will be really great for any designers or decorators out there who love making the prettiest garden around. It essentially lets you plan out your garden even when you don't have the items you want. So you can place the different plants and then fill them in with seeds later. Right before I finished day 2, after another hour of gameplay, I got my first resident errand from Olga. She wanted me to decorate fresh spring acreage for her, which I was more than happy to do. Unfortunately, this quest was bugged in the early version of the game I played, but there'll be plenty of examples of other errands your villagers may ask you to complete later on in the video. Day 3 brought with it my first experience with what I'm calling a strange shadow creature. When checking my map to see what travellers were visiting the garden that day, I noticed a small black indicator among the white and decided to go and investigate. Naturally, along the way, I continued to record the various plants I discovered in the garden, and my inventory was quickly getting full with everything I was collecting. Or so I thought at the time, but this was only a small glimpse at the overflowing inventory that was to come in the future. As I neared the strange shadow creature, the shadows around me started to draw in, and I knew that I was in the right place. I tried to speak to the spirit who was worried about something, but sadly I couldn't respond as I didn't have the tones I needed to. Close by the spirit was another traveller to meet for the first time, and their name was Otto. They thought my garden had everything they needed, like grass and a log, but sadly they didn't want to stay here as they said they'd be gone by tomorrow. There's also another new traveller to meet as well, called Kiva, who is searching for blue pigment. While I don't have anything to offer her, she asks if I'd be willing to trade her botanicals from my garden so that she can turn them into dyes, which I am more than happy to oblige. I also tried getting a haircut from her, which ended up looking exactly like my original haircut. But there are even more people to meet, the next of which is Chaska, who is carrying a huge pile of furniture on their back. They seem quite nervous as they talk to me, but I soon put them at ease and they let me take a look at the items they have in stock. After looking through their extensive stock, I end up buying a vase stone planter, which I thought would meet the requirements of Olga's quest. On my way to meet another new visitor, I came across a dig spot, which is indicated by these rising white bubbles around a circle. I didn't have a shovel yet, but I was diligently marking them all on my map for when I did get one. The penultimate visitor was a monkey called Bunk, who carried a pot of freshly brewed tea on their back. I drank the piping hot tea they offered me and wondered if the trees feel hours like seconds, or seconds like hours. They tell me about the difficulties of brewing tea and invite me to speak to them in the future to find out more. Finally, I meet Terracotta and Whaley, a brother and sister duo who run a travelling furniture store. Their caravan is huge, and each day they have a deal where some resources are worth double their usual value. Today it was clothing, but I'm embarrassed to admit that I couldn't work out how to buy things off them. I kept talking to them, expecting them to offer me an option to view their wares like the other visitors, but they never did. Chat, that's because their wares were on the ground in front of them for me to look at. But for some bizarre reason, I didn't even consider that and just left without buying anything. On my way back to Fresh Spring Acreage to place the furniture for Olga, I actually bump into her and she challenges me to a conker competition. She even gave me a conker to get started as I didn't have one yet, and then we had it out in a conker swinging competition. She should have kept the conker though, because I ended up smashing hers to pieces. She declared me the winner and gave me a stone lamp as my prize, which I ended up placing in Fresh Spring Acreage as well to complete her quest. This obviously didn't work, as we now know it was a bug, but this was just the start of the many, many pieces of furniture I'd place here over the coming days. My fourth day at the garden path actually ended up being day 6 of my garden's life, as I took a couple of days break. But I started the day by talking to Olga to try and complete her quest. At this point, I was a little confused, but I thought I'd possibly not put the furniture in the right Fresh Spring Acreage, I had 3, or that there was a specific item that I needed to place there. Either way, I started day 4 as I had the others by meeting the new travellers visiting my garden. My first stop was my friend Augustus. After perusing his store, I ended up buying my first spade, which was a beginner's wartime shovel. Finally, I could dig up all those spots I'd marked on my map. There were quite a few by this point, and the closest one was on my route to my next traveller. Digging it up uncovered a safe box, which I opened up to reveal a wish tag, which contains the written wishes of others. I don't know if these were all submitted by Kickstarter or a result of a cute event that happens later on in the game, but I thought this was a great little touch. The wish tag read, "Be happy," which was simple and to the point, really. I met Ida next, another future resident-to-be who liked the garden but wasn't ready to move in yet. Then it was time to meet Tabal, who thought us humans had ruined the garden by changing everything, and informed me that they'd be finding a new route to avoid the garden in the future. But they did let me check out the shop before they left, which had several varieties of tea in stock. I ended up buying some oolong to brew later before continuing along my way. I found another wish tag a little while later before meeting Malachi by the roaring fire. Like most of the others, Malachi thought the garden was the perfect spot, but said that they'd be gone by this evening. I couldn't work out what vegetable they were supposed to be, but they were definitely the most talkative of the travellers I'd met thus far. The next 2 dig spots rewarded me with another wish tag and page 16 of the journal. It spoke of a mischievous little creature playing tricks on a cool autumn day, and I found myself wondering if one day I'd meet these strange creatures in the garden too. I also met Jahi, a stargazer who could help me discover new stars. They also taught me about dust flies, which are made of the same dust as the stars above us, and which were very valuable when caught. They gave me a jar and suggested I start collecting some, so I did so immediately. It was at this point that I remembered a collection of furniture items I'd found when I first entered the garden, and I went to collect all of them. I also stumbled across a spirit stone next to the community centre that lets you change the time in the garden. This is a great little addition for people who like time travelling in games like this, but I didn't need to use it, so I just left it. This was also when I discovered that the community centre board tells you who is visiting the next day, which can be super useful. To wrap up day 4, I placed all of the plant pots and fences in fresh spring acreage, but to no avail. I spent the next few days exploring and recording the plants in my garden, searching for journal pages and meeting the various travellers who stop by every day. On day 5, I met the cutest pig called Buttercup, who sells different types of soil. Here's a better photo of her, as she's a bit obscured by the bushes here. And I also met a new potential villager called Claire. Then on day 6, I met Aim, who wanted to review my garden. They said they'd give my garden a grade depending on how well decorated and healthy it was, and they'd be back soon to review it. I met a cool peach villager called Alex, and saw Jahei again too. Day 8 brought with it Grant the Carrot, as well as a visit from Bunk, who rudely refused to talk to me. And I also finally discovered my second journal page. The third journal page came soon after on day 9, and I was able to meet Bo, a cute artichoke. In case you're wondering, all of these villagers who are stopping by have very different requirements for what they need before they'll move into your garden. Whether that's a certain type of furniture, of flowers, or for you to have unlocked a particular star. I'm not surprised they don't want to stay here yet though, as on day 10 I got the dreadful news that my garden is an F rank. I am ashamed and heartbroken, but even more determined to keep planting things and helping them to grow. When I logged in on day 12, I was surprised by cute lanterns floating all over the garden. This was my first in-game event called Lights Fall. For this event, I would write out a wish on a piece of paper and tie it to a lantern, which would then float away into the sky. If someone else finds my wish, then it might come true. All of the wishes I'd found in the game so far were those of other people who'd made their own wishes on Lights Fall. How sweet. I collected my lantern from Whaley and made my way to Terracotta to make my wish. I was fully expecting to need to type out a sentence, but I was really surprised to see it's a sort of multiple choice sentence builder with a lot of different options for you to choose from. After much deliberation, I finally went for, I wish that the ducks will stay breezy. Insightful, I know. Then it was time to release my lantern. I made my way to a little bit of headland poking out over the river and released my lantern into the cool night air. For the rest of the day, I was surrounded by floating lanterns drifting around in the air above me while I worked on my garden, catching dust flies and collecting resources. I also found my 5th journal page, which told a story of magic created through craft, which seemed very fitting given the crafted lanterns floating magically through the air around me. Today was also the day I decided to put an end to Olga's impossible quest. After working with the devs to resolve the issue, they told me that I could actually delete errands to spawn new ones in a menu. This is a trick that I use many times in the later games to skip quests that seem too difficult to complete. And now you can use it too. Almost immediately, Olga gave me a new errand to find a pick nettle for her tea, which I'm able to complete straight away as I have an abundance of nettles in my inventory. My reward is a pair of trousers which I put on as they grant me a tone while recording. What you're not seeing in this video is that I was doing a lot of recording. I was about to head out when Olga asked me to help her with another errand. This time she wanted 5 laurel blooms, and as luck would have it, I also have a supply of those in my inventory. I'm able to complete that quest too and received another pair of trousers from Olga in return. She's apparently just given me all her hand-me-down clothes that she doesn't want anymore, but I'm okay with that. On day 13, I met up with Chaska, who asked me for the dust flies that I've been carrying around for weeks. In return, she gave me a voucher which is valid to replace any of the resources in her shop, which is really cool. Day 13 was also the day I tried to talk to the shadowy creature, so I entered the darkness around it and spoke. I tell it to not give up and that tomorrow's a new day. But sadly, before I can continue, I run out of tones to reassure it once more. So I have to leave the conversation to return to later, which is when I bump into Molly, who is another wandering potential visitor who looks like a clove of garlic. You may notice that my character is walking very slowly now. That's because as your inventory fills up, your character slows down, as is the case in a lot of games. I'm a huge hoarder, and I feel like hoarding is kind of necessary in a game like this, so as you'll notice over the coming days, I get a lot slower. Olga also had a new errand for me. She wanted a pair of secateurs, and thankfully I had the original pair that Augustus had given me because I had now upgraded. It felt fitting to finally pass these on to someone else in need, and my reward was another item of clothing. This time, a skirt. I also found a new journal page, and this one was quite sad, talking about a young man calling out at night. But I only needed 7 more to complete Thom's quest. After speaking to Bunk, I had enough tones to return to the Shadow Spirit and respond to their next statement. I made my way over there to tell them that I'll remember them, but unfortunately that seemed to be the wrong thing to say as the conversation reverted back to the first conversation choices. I had no tones left either, so I need to wait to try again. On day 17, I finally found the final journal page I needed to complete Thom's quest, and I was excited to see the outcome of it. I started the day by collecting 3 fish for an errand for Olga before finally making my way to see Thom. He told me that while the past may seem far away, he could feel it right here in the pages of the journal. While his memories leave him at times, they return with the right invitation. Does that mean that these are his pages? That this is his journal? Before I could ask him, he gives me a memory seed to plant and tells me how it grows not only in the soil but in time and carries the voices of the garden that came before it. He asked me to plant it somewhere special and to nurture it and help it grow, and I know exactly where to plant it. In my quest to decorate Fresh Spring Acreage, I'd created the perfect little area with plant pots and fences, and that's where I wanted to sow it. When I did, I heard hushed murmurs that I couldn't quite make out coming from the seed. I immediately rushed to tell Thom, who didn't seem very surprised, more curious. Apparently, all seeds and seedlings whisper as they tell you what they need to grow. Sometimes it just takes time to hear them though, and I need to figure out how to help it grow. He also confessed that the reason he wanted it to grow was selfish in nature, and that reason would become more apparent in time, just convincing me more that this journal is either his or someone close to him. When I load into the game on day 19, it's winter. The entire garden is covered in a layer of snow and many of the trees have lost their leaves and flowers. It does make it quite difficult to see all the digging spots though. As I explore the garden now, there's a lot less to collect than usual, but I still continue to diligently record all the trees and plants that I encounter. On day 20, I came across a beautiful pansy in full bloom near my tent. I wonder if it's one of the wildflowers I planted so much earlier in the year. I hope so. I also witnessed my first fall of snow as I'm slowly wandering around my garden. It's a lovely little effect that really made the world feel that extra little bit cozy. With little else to do in my garden thanks to the winter weather, I decided to spend my time decorating and bought some new furniture from Chaska. Olga also had a new quest for me as she'd like a glowworm, and honestly I have so many of them, I'm almost glad to get rid of them. After dropping that off, and gosh, look at how full my inventory is, it was time for me to place my new decorations. I was going so slow now, it was getting quite painful as I wandered around the garden looking for the right spot for my furnishings. My inventory was so full, but I couldn't get rid of any of the journal pages as surely I'd need them in the future. And I was wondering the same about the wish tags too. I just couldn't bear to get rid of either. Before I wrapped up for the day, I found the perfect spot for my new easel and my gnome by the river and then headed to bed. Still have a few things I want to achieve before I finish, like helping the Shadow Spirit, which I'm able to do on day 21. I tell them I'm listening and then say it's not true, and just like that the shadow creature disappears and the darkness lifts with it. But when I wake up the next morning, it's back again feeling as hopeless as ever. Thankfully, I remember exactly what to say and it disappears again, taking with it the darkness. I cannot believe how slow I'm going on day 22, and even sprinting feels barely quicker than a walking pace. Somehow, I made it all the way to Kiva, who had a blue ball of yarn in stock, which I quickly picked up. I knew it was one of the items required to invite a villager into my garden, and I really wanted to try to get someone else to join before the end of my 30 days. Rather than place it somewhere sensible though, I ended up placing it right next to the river. If you think about it, the blue complements the water really well. Too bad I didn't have any roses to invite this mysterious person to my garden. The following day, I bought a lot of seeds from Thom. More than I'd probably bought in the game thus far, and I started planting them everywhere. This was also the day that I finally mastered the art of fertilizing. I've had a few false starts on previous days as the wishes don't specifically tell you what items they want, and a few of them look very similar. But on day 23, I successfully fertilized not 1, not 2, but 3 of my new gorse seedlings. I'm going to chalk it down as 1 part luck and the rest just pure hoarding, but I'm proud of myself. We're really nearing the end of the year now as I head into day 24, which I started by giving Olga a fishing rod in return for a new shirt. I then spoke to Chashka, who has the coolest new hat, which is actually a plant pot. I buy it immediately, as well as a wooden chest to try to empty out some of my inventory. Then on day 25, it's time for Cold's Pass. I chatted to Olga, who explained that Cold's Pass is a tradition to say goodbye to the cold weather and welcome in the new year. A chance to celebrate a fresh start without forgetting the past. After telling her I was ready, we all gathered round a fire and Olga encouraged us to throw away all the items we no longer needed. I selected some of my dead flowers at first and then tried to cancel them and instead cancelled the entire thing. Oops! I was also given the opportunity to get rid of some of the land in the garden, I think, but I didn't want to risk it, so I turned that down as well. Everyone around the fire closed their eyes and began to sing as the fire crackled away beside them, and it was so beautiful. The credits rolled after that, and I think this is the right time to end this story. Sadly, I wasn't able to expand the residents in my village beyond Olga, but those were my first days in the garden path, which ended up being just over a year in the game. I really like that while it plays in real time, the years are shorter, so you're not waiting literal months to experience a new season like you do in Animal Crossing or Cozy Grove. The villagers are also so cute, and I love that they're all vegetables. I just wish I could have managed to get more of them to move into my garden during this playthrough. But you'll just need to discover that yourself. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of my first year in the garden path. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope to see you next time. Bye!